Good afternoon. I'm Dawn Afodele. I serve as the Community and Economic Development Relationship Manager for Fifth Third Bank in North Florida. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the Resilient Communities National Forum and welcome you to our session, Trends in Affordable Housing for Today and Tomorrow. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. All participants are asked to mute themselves for the duration of the session. Please enter your name and organization in the chat so we know who is here. Enter any questions for the speaker in chat and I will make sure that they are addressed. Closed captioning is enabled, so if you need this feature, please hover over More at the bottom of the screen and click on Enable Live Transcript. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and the session materials and recording will be made available approximately 1 week after the event. Remember, this is a safe space, so please be respectful of yourself and others. And at the end of today's session, you'll be asked to complete a 3-question survey. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our experts. Ann Ray directs the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse, an online source of local data on affordable housing supply and demand. Since joining the center in 2011, she has also performed research on the housing needs of farm workers and persons with disabilities, preservation of subsidized housing, states' implementation of the low-income housing tax credit, energy efficiency and transit accessibility in Florida's affordable housing developments, and the effects of homelessness on children's education. Our next panelist, David Harder, currently works at Suncoast Housing Connections in Clearwater, Florida, as their real estate manager. With over 30 years of experience in community development, construction, and real estate sales, David is a certified general contractor and a licensed real estate agent. Through development, general contracting, project management, and consulting, David has worked on over 3,000 housing units and 80,000 square feet of commercial space. Our last speaker, Oliver L. Gross, is president of New Urban Development, LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Urban League of Greater Miami, Incorporated in Florida. Mr. Gross, through New Urban, has primary responsibility for the acquisition, development, construction oversight, financing, and property management of the myriad commercial and residential housing developments owned and or managed by the Urban League of Greater Miami and its subsidiaries. Mr. Gross has experience as a real estate developer, public administrator, and commercial banker. Mr. Gross has earned certifications as a real estate development professional and a U.S. HUD certified occupancy specialist. All right, Ann, you're up first, so I'm going to turn things over to you. And audience, don't forget to put your questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Dawn. All right, we got somebody to give me a thumbs up if you can see first slide. All right, thanks, Terry. And thanks so much for that introduction, Dawn, and to the Alliance for having me here today. So yeah, I'm with the Schimberg Center for Housing Studies at University of Florida. And we're part of the Rinker School of Construction Management in UF's College of Design, Construction, and Planning. And the Schimberg Center was founded in 1988 by the Florida State Legislature to serve as the state's affordable housing research arm. And since the year 2000, we provided the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse, which is the project I coordinate, which is a free online source of information about housing supply and demand in cities and counties and the state as a whole. We do that under contract with Florida Housing Finance Corporation, our state's housing finance agency. So I thought we could sort of kick things off by talking about some of the trends that we've been keeping an eye on and really, that we have data that we can display to look at what's been happening since we've been tracking this housing supply in the state really, and these growing affordability needs over the past 20 years or so. And so I want to focus on 3 trends that we've been keeping an eye on lately. One is that Florida is a growing state and how both our home ownership and our rental base has continued to grow enormously over that 20 plus years now that we've been tracking things. I want to talk about what's really been our bread and butter as a center, and that's really looking at the state's ongoing and increasing housing affordability challenges. And then I want to zoom in a little bit and talk about some of the things that we've been witnessing really in the short term, what COVID-19 has both affected and taught us about housing stability in the state. But I encourage you, and I think it's in the slide at the end, and I can certainly provide additional information, to check out our Housing Data Clearinghouse yourself, to contact me with any questions about it, because we do have very local information above the city and county level. So let me see if I get this to advance. Okay. As I mentioned, the one big project that we do for our state's Housing Finance Agency is our data clearinghouse. The other is a rental market study that we do for the state every 3 years. Some of you might have seen that Florida Housing Finance Corporation puts out. And we did our last one in 2019. We're about to do one in 2022. And up until now, the story we've been telling really since the height of the housing market and then the crash is the growth in renters in the state. And so I fully expected that that would continue to be the story as we extended this now over the past couple of years, or since we did the study. But actually, what we found is that, after the real estate crash, when you had foreclosure happening, households flipping from owners to renters, we had growth in renting after the real estate boom and crash, and then also new people moving to the state, that net growth tended to rent. But that really leveled off in the past 3 to 5 years. And what we're seeing now is that the number of homeowners in the state is once again increasing. So we're actually surpassing even that height just in the sheer number of homeowners where we were in the year 2000. So lots of new people in Florida post-recession, and it's both owner and renter households. And that, of course, is placing tremendous pressure on our housing stock. Over the past 20 or so years, as we've been tracking this, Florida went for renters from being, I think, a relatively affordable state to one that really has a shrinking affordable housing stock. And so even though we added, if you look back, we added all those renters, which means we also added a lot of rental housing units, whether that was new construction, whether that was homes switching from ownership to rental. But all of that growth, more than 1 million units, were in units that rent for, in recent dollars, more than $1,000 a month, including both rent and housing costs. And we actually lost hundreds of thousands of units that were renting for less than $1,000. And so that was either because rents were going up, that conversion of single family stock to home ownership added larger units that tend to be more expensive. And so while we have both lower and higher income renters moving to the state and that kind of growth, we're only really adding the higher cost units. And so that's placed tremendous strain on a lot of households. Another thing that we track in our data clearinghouse are home sale prices. So we keep a database of all home sales every year, and we have that going back to the year 2000 for every county and back to the 90s for many counties. And what this map shows is we're starting to party like it's the mid 2000s again. That correcting for inflation, all those counties you see in red, their median home price in 2020 is back to or over where it was in 2006, which was really the height price-wise of the state's market. All the ones in darker orange are back to the 2005 median price, and all the places in sort of paler orange, yellow are back to 2004 prices. So that means that, whether this is a bubble, whether this is just a stronger market and all that pressure, price-wise, we're really back to where we were as our housing markets were taking off. And in some cases, even as our housing markets were peaking for single family homes. And so, again, whether that's sustainable or not, it means that people who are looking for homes right now are facing the same kind of market they were seeing when Florida was in its mid 2000s real estate boom. And so that has tremendous implications for affordability. What that ends up with is a lot of households paying more than 30% of their income for their housing. And here, if you're working with programs, whether it's CDBG or with housing programs, we may be the only folks who are used to talking about income in terms of percentage of area median income. But what this graph really shows is that the lowest income renters make up the largest share of our state's cost burden households who are paying more than 30% of their income for their housing costs, whether that's renter costs or owner costs. What we've seen change a little bit is more in growth in cost burden among people in the 50 to 80% AMI group. That's a group that was relatively well served, say, coming into the 2000s, but we've seen growth of cost burden ever since. But still, our deepest need is really for the lowest income households, both owners and renters, and particularly renters. So very low income renters make up the greatest share of our cost burden households. And while there's more of an effort, I think, to target renters and owners going up the income stream, we can't really forget about that deep need that exists at the lowest end. There's nothing mysterious about this. We talked about how housing costs have gone up, but what kept up with that, of course, is wages. And so the National Income Housing Coalition estimates that in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent and pay 30% of your income for your housing, a Floridian would need to earn about $24 an hour, and that's working full time, 52 weeks a year, 40 hours a week. Well, the median wage for Florida is $17 an hour, a little over 17. So half of our jobs are paying well under what it costs to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And in fact, if somebody were to pay 30% of their income for their housing, there are a lot of professions that we have that don't come near that $24 an hour wage you would need. So if you look at if somebody really making median wage for different jobs really were to pay, if they were paying 30% of their income for their housing costs, we would need a lot of rental housing and ownership in the $600, $700, $700 to $800 range, under $1,000. And of course, as I showed before, those are the units that we're losing. It also shows, I think, how vulnerable a household is when there's only one working person in it. And we've actually looked at, for a rental market study, we've looked at renter households at different income levels, and we found that other than at the very lowest income levels, on under 30% of AMI, the majority of renter households have at least one working person. And even at the extremely low income level, almost all the households are either have a working person, are elderly, or are disabled. And a lot of times the difference between being able to make it or not, and the difference between income and cost burden for renters is not whether somebody's working, it's whether you have one person working or two. So single person households, households where there's only one worker, single parent households are particularly impacted because this is what they're pulling in, this is what they're able to afford. Turning to that question about how does a pandemic affect all of this? So we really came in, of course, everything I've shown you so far are trends that, because the data lags a little bit, are all things that we already came into the pandemic with. And of course, that didn't make anything any easier. So we kind of look at, is the pandemic causing a housing crisis? I think it's really important to realize we were already coming in with this enormous affordable housing shortage. And I wouldn't call something that baked into the system a crisis anymore. If I were giving you this presentation a couple of years ago, I would have been or a few years ago, I would have been showing trends where maybe the numbers looked a little bit different, but the fundamentals were the same, where our housing costs have just really become unhinged from what a lot of people are able to afford. But some kind of interesting thing, we did start to track more information coming into the pandemic, and something that we'd not been doing before, but we felt was important, was to track filings of evictions and foreclosures. And so we went back and got data. We actually have data going back to 2019 for both of them. And the first thing we learned from the pandemic is how shockingly high our eviction rates were before the pandemic. So you're sort of coming into the year and the pandemic with these very high rates of evictions, is the gray line, and a smaller number of foreclosures. It shows you what a stabilizing influence homeownership can be. And then in the summer of 2020, with the pandemic, early summer, we have a really strong statewide moratorium on eviction and foreclosure filings, and for non-payment. And so both evictions and foreclosures fell tremendously. And while they've come back up as restrictions have been lifted, and then if you extended this forward, you would see the end of the eviction moratorium, the federal eviction moratorium. Eviction filings have come up, but still have not reached historic levels. And foreclosure filings have remained quite low. And I think that shows the influence that policy can have that we were making during the pandemic, where we've, on the foreclosure side, different lenders have put in different kinds of forbearance policies. And on the eviction side, we're starting to provide rental assistance, coupled with whatever limitations there were during the eviction moratorium. And those had a really immediate effect on our evictions and foreclosures, an immediate and ongoing effect. And I think that's something to think about going forward as we hopefully come out of this, how effective those policies can be. Sorry, I skipped one here. And that's one of those policies and something that's really still ongoing is our effort to get emergency rental assistance out to households in need. This blue line here shows over time the spending of the state's latest tranche of emergency rental assistance. The gray line shows the combined effort of local programs at the city and county level. And this blue dotted line shows the percentage of funds spent in the United States as a whole on average. And so what we found was ramping up early, which and there's a tremendous amount of, anywhere from 0% of funds spent to all of the funds spent by these local programs. But what we found was starting to get the money out early and quickly was really effective, and that the state program, because it didn't get going really until May, has greatly lagged our local efforts. It also shows, I think, how it helps to be on the ground and have that infrastructure in place to get assistance out. And so, my colleagues are going to talk about more about, I think, about increasing the housing supply and perhaps challenges to increasing the housing supply. But I think that the lessons of the COVID era policy and that emergency rental assistance gives us something to think about in terms of, for years and years, decades maybe, we've been talking about how we do more with less. How do we create more with less? I think we also need to really think about how we create affordable housing and affordable housing supply, how we do more with more. So if resources were suddenly to flood into our communities, would we be ready for them? Would we have a plan? The communities that were able to do that have been able to assist their residents a lot more quickly and sustainably. And I would argue that we need that same kind of thinking and planning for potential, whether it's our state housing trust funds, whether it's potentially infrastructure funding coming out of the bills that are in the Senate now. I encourage people, it looks like the housing programs may be one of the first things to go in negotiations. So if people haven't contacted their representatives about how important housing spending is in the federal infrastructure bill, I encourage you to do so. But if funding were to become available, we could do more to build an affordable housing continuum that includes supportive housing, affordable rental housing, and affordable home ownership opportunities. So I'd be happy to come back to this as we're having a discussion. I want to make sure my colleagues get enough time to talk, but that would be the thought I would leave you with, is really, what does your ideal look like? What would your community look like if it had a fully developed, sustainable, affordable housing system? And what would it take to get ready for the resources that might come that would make that possible? So I'll go ahead and stop there. If people get the slides, I'd encourage you to check out our main affordable housing, the Schimberg site, and our data clearinghouse, and my contact information is there because I'm always happy to answer questions. We also do a lot of custom data requests.
Excellent. Thank you, Anne. And I have definitely been on your website, and you guys have a lot of data there for sure that we have utilized. So thank you for your information. I know we'll have some questions for you later in the session. I'm going to turn things over now to David.
Thank you, Dawn. And I'll share my screen with you. I want to focus on the single family market conditions in housing that we're facing, primarily on a for sale basis, and take the direction of directing it to a really local level. And so where we're working here in a project in the city of St. Petersburg CRA area, some of the statistics that are happening to us right now as we're trying to develop for sale single family is that even in the CRA areas, even in what we would affectionately call our highest priority areas for improving housing, these market trends, these market conditions are running out of control in many ways. Property that we just finished construction on right now in August of 2020, when we closed on our construction loan, the appraised value of that 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, just over 1,200 square feet, was $192,000. When we signed a contract with the potential buyer, and the bank sent out their appraiser, that same home was appraised at $262,000. And so in that period of time, the value of the home just shot up. As with all markets, I guess the lesson for me is that there's no market appreciation left behind at all in what we've been facing during the COVID event and the market conditions. And of course, construction costs increased because of all of the various supply chain issues, material cost increases. Our construction costs increased by 38%. And unlike a lot of times, in the construction industry, we're very used to, having a couple of items exponentially go out of control, whether that was steel a couple of years ago or going back a while back when we all thought it was important to bring Chinese drywall into the country. We had a drywall shortage. We're always used to the ebb and flow of prices, of materials. But I think the thing that struck me the most about the construction costs was that there was not a type of material that was left behind, whether it was windows and doors, whether it was our truss packages, whether it was shingles, whether it was the wood, whether it was the concrete block, whether it was appliances, whether it's paint. Paint apparently now is a supply chain issue, and it's all encompassing, and it feels like it's something that nobody has control over, whether it's us, the developers, owners, or whether it's the general contractors. And it's negotiating construction contracts because of this. I haven't seen a general contractor in the last 6 months that has not demanded material cost price escalation clauses in their contracts. There's just no control in the market from that perspective at this point in time. And as owners and developers, to have no control over our construction costs, that impacts our construction loans. It impacts so many things that are just uncontrollable when it comes to paying for everything to get to our certificate of occupancy. Supply chain issues have, on average, what I've experienced, again, focusing on the local market, what I have to see week to week, a single family house, which in most markets is easy to build in, 4 months, 5 months, we're adding 3.5 months just because of delivery issues of materials to single family construction. And, the impact, once again, construction loans are outstanding that much longer. We're spending more money on our development pro forma. We're paying more for carrying costs. We're paying more for maintenance. All of those types of things are adding to what it takes for us to build single family houses these days. And always wanting to strive, to have the pipeline of what we're doing on a single family basis. I've seen, we're back to what I affectionately say, everybody believes that they've got a pot of gold underneath their dirt and are selling it appropriately, so an average lot being purchased for $18,000. I've seen sellers saying they're wanting and getting upwards of $60,000 for a single family lot. Well, I can't fit that into a development pro forma and call what we do affordable housing, with land prices and on that basis. Is one house, it's just kind of hard to average and balance those types of land costs as well. So that those are some of the things that I see us facing on the construction side on a day-to-day basis because of our situation. The impact to our buyers obviously is a huge thing as well. Federal down payment assistance programs require we use families at 80% AMI and lower, and at current market prices for the homes, there's just not enough subsidy for families to be able to borrow much. Much like the statistics that we saw earlier, and so the shift of families, who can afford to buy a house, as we do our affordability analysis, of our potential homebuyer clients, with these types of sale prices and houses, it's almost impossible to reach 80% AMI for a family income, and you're looking more at 100% and 120% AMI families. Still, the workforce housing stability is still valid and very, very valuable. But how do we reach more and more buyers that that need that housing stability, from the home ownership perspective, is something that's very, very, very important. So, and so it begs the question, what is the future of down payment assistance programs in relationship to what the market values in all neighborhoods are, as we're looking at for sale product and bringing homeowners into communities. I know a lot of municipalities are increasing the down payment assistance that's available to families when they want to purchase a house. We've had a lot of discussions with different municipalities about how to revamp the down payment assistance program, but the affordability, for families, it's still a really, really tough nut to crack as far as reaching a variety of families with the various income levels for a home ownership basis. So where is the future taking us? I guess, who knows? We just don't know. Market values of single family homes, it seems that some of the insanity of purchasing homes has slowed down a little bit. And, so people are starting to stop offering, 10%, 15% over listed price for homes. Houses are actually staying on the market longer than 24 hours. Tried to be funny, but it's probably fairly accurate from that perspective as well. And so where those trends are going to lead us, I think things are slowing down from what I observe locally, but as far as, is there a market correction? I don't think any of us just have any idea from that perspective. Construction costs and times, once again, talking to general contractors, talking to suppliers, houses seem to be, material costs seem to be stabilizing. There seems to slowly, lead times are coming down slowly. But, now all of the news is about how many ships are sitting outside of the Los Angeles harbors waiting to unload supplies, and whether that be our family games for Christmas or whether that be construction materials, the supply chain issue still is not fixed by any stretch of the imagination. And so, we have to figure out how do we work through this and balance what we know right now. And one of the things that I do is I work really hard to stay in touch with the industry, talk to as many people as I can to find out what what they're feeling about the market and at a local level. And you know, so right now it seems that we have a little bit of a stability inflection point, and so I'm hoping we have predictability for the next while, and then we'll manage to start getting back to a bit more of a normal pattern as far as construction costs and construction times to deliver homes. And buyer affordability. It looks like I forgot to put a question mark behind that, because I don't think anybody knows what the future as far as subsidy for buyers is going to look like in these market prices with what's happening here. But if we really are intent and focused on being able to deliver affordable housing to first-time home buyers, you know, we'll have to get creative. We have to figure out how to address the buyer affordability issue with all of the resources that we can bring to the table on that, and hopefully, you know, with all of our creativity, you know, we will get some answers, and we will be able to get some stability for our home buyers. So with that, I will release the screen and turn it back to you, Dawn.
Thank you, David. And yes, I agree. You know, just personal experience. We were looking into possibly buying a new home a couple years ago, and if we didn't do it then, we're not going to do it now, because those prices go up, I think, every month, it seems. So definitely skyrocketing prices, construction costs, et cetera, impacting anybody's ability to be able to purchase in this market. All right, well, we do have a couple questions for you, and we're going to come back to those after Oliver does his presentation, and I think he is queued up now.
Thank you, Don. I had muted myself, so forgive me. But it has been insightful thus far. I could almost say amen to everything that David said relative to some of the trends that are affecting them or him, and those that are doing single family development. There are much of the same kinds of variables that are affecting development from a multi-family standpoint. And so, you know, again, I've been asked to look at this from the lens of multi-family development, and you know, generally in the state of Florida, but I think I bring just a little more perspective. I would like to add from maybe South Florida as well. But again, you know, the availability of land, construction market volatility, you know, cost versus wage are those issues that I think that are prevalent to all of us who seek to deliver this project. From an availability of land standpoint, we can kind of flick to that slide if you want. I'm not controlling the PowerPoint, which is probably a good thing. But you know, at the top of all of our lists is again the availability of land. That is the primary driver and determinant in one's ability to deliver quality, affordable housing. That being able to find and to acquire land at prices, as David alluded to, that makes sense. And to some degree, when we think about Florida in general and South Florida in particular, I think it is, you know, to some degree, a supply and demand issue, where I think we began to see this prior pandemic, and certainly since and during the pandemic, it is being exacerbated a bit more, where you know, we've just got a population growth that is becoming, on one hand, we're experiencing it. In some instances, we're enjoying it as sellers. in terms of what it's doing to the value of land and to one's property. But I think the population growth that we see in Florida is in general, and in South Florida, you've got population growth that's coming from both the North and the South. And it is just creating a real demand for land, and driving up the price of both just raw dirt and existing properties. And so until we can figure out how do you balance that and manage that, we're going to, and that is going to be an issue. Don or Ann talked about, I think in her presentation, how we'll be seeing a reduction in the inventory of quality affordable housing. And I think, again, part of that is just that the cost for acquisition, be it dirt or be it existing properties, is just a real factor in that. It is almost, again, I said, at the risk of being redundant, another factor has been the volatility in the construction market, and what that's doing to the ability to be able to timely and efficiently and economically deliver a product is an issue that doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. Contractor anxieties and angst is at a level that I don't think that any of us could have ever imagined or seen coming. We are in the midst of negotiating 3 GC contracts as we speak, and from week to week, the number changes. And so we're trying to get to a place where we can get the contractor to let's just finish negotiating the business points of the contract, and so we can get to the number. And as you move through that process, it's like, give me one more week and I need to go back to the market and just check these numbers. And so when you talk about trying to cement all of your funding sources, it gets to be a bit of a challenge, and let alone just having some kind of real semblance of confidence in construction schedules with the supply chain shortages and those bottlenecks. It is lessening. One of the things that we're seeing is that it is shrinking our contractor pool, particularly our subcontractor pool. And that is, again, driving the affordability of prices. So if you want me to come and work on your project, there's a premium if you want me to look at yours as opposed to looking at the guy across the street. And all of those things that you're managing all at once. And again, talked about this again in her presentation relative to Florida and the relationship between the cost of living, and particularly the cost of housing, and the wages that folk earn who we probably qualify or categorize as being the center of that affordable housing market. Generally, our targeted market are those that are at anywhere from 30% to 100% AMI when you're kind of shifting off into workforce. And I think David alluded to that. But again, our wages just don't keep up with the cost of housing, which is being driven by those other 2 factors that are alluded to a bit earlier. And so there has to be, I think, a moment of reckoning in terms of how we begin to address that. And then the last point that I want to talk about is the availability of capital for affordable housing. The cost of private capital, private equity in some of these deals is getting more and more expensive. People are looking for higher returns. Concurrently, most of or many of the multifamily affordable housing deals have, as part of the financing stack, low-income housing tax credits, or as a result of some things that are happening in DC, changes in the tax code, the pricing for tax credits have begun to fall. This time pre-COVID, you were getting in the high 90s, in some instances over $1 for a tax credit. Right now, if you can get 90 cents per credit, you are doing really, really well. And so there's this great disconnect when the availability of capital is shrinking to some degree, but the cost of doing business continues to increase. So that is, again, I think the real issue that most developers and providers of multifamily affordable housing is trying to figure out how they manage that. And then the challenge is whether or not do you go and just retract altogether and sit on the sidelines in hopes that something changes. That helps nobody in the long run. Doesn't help those who are in need of quality affordable housing. And it doesn't help the developer who, again, this is his business model from day to day. So those are the things that we're seeing right now and living in real time that's affecting the inventory and increasing the inventory of affordable housing. Next slide, if we might. And we tend to look at things in our shop from the perspective of, well, what does success look like as we approach our endeavors? And we, again, look at it from what I call a from-to proposition. This is where we are. Where do we need to go to be able to effectuate or to self-actualize in terms of what our desired outcomes are? And so, again, we looked at it, and I think just wanted to highlight 4 areas: creating strategic partnerships, community empowerment and participation. That's the next slide. Collective participation and the availability of capital for affordable housing. So when we think about if we're going to be able to have a positive effect on increasing the inventory of affordable housing, and I'm always mindful that affordable is a relative term. And so, what's affordable to one may or may not be affordable to another. And that creates some nuances, as I said earlier, when you're talking about trying to deal with a client population that moves anywhere from 30% of AMI up to 80, 100% of AMI. And you're trying to create a business and a development model, a program that speaks to that. But to be able to do that, we think that it's important relative to being able to create what we call strategic partnerships and the alignment of private and public partnerships, which yield mutually palatable outcomes. And to that point, we think that it is important that there be some consistency in how one addresses the delivery or the increase in the inventory of affordable housing. Ann talked about at the end of her presentation about the need of what does a plan approach for doing that. And what we found is that you find a lot of people talking about and understanding or stating that there is a need and we've got a crisis relative to affordable housing, but nobody's seemingly trying to figure out how do they work in conjunction with all of the intended, affected, and needful parties to create a path forward that says at the end of the day, we're going to responsibly get from 1 unit of affordable housing to 101 units of affordable housing. And there needs to be some real conversation about that at the end of the day. So that's important. The other is community empowerment and participation. We think that in this market, it creates an opportunity in this season of what we call social justice, racial and wealth equity or even inequity, that there is an opportunity, even in light of this, to increase the participation and the collaboration with nonprofits, organizations, entities, and individuals who are indigenous to many of the neighborhoods that you find these products, units, and projects being developed in, that one can be intentional about how do you do that and create what we call some wealth building opportunities, legacy building opportunities, preservation of the culture and character of neighborhoods. But I think the important part of that is about being intentional about how to do that. Heretofore, folk were just talking about I'm delivering units with no thought about the impact or lack thereof that it has on the neighborhoods that we work in, other than a physical structure. For that, we think that again is a wonderful opportunity that we ought to be looking at, in addition to providing just the physical structure. And that sort of doves into that next little component about collective participation and stakeholder synergy to be able to make a successful impact. We've got to take a broader look at all of the components that defines the delivery of quality, affordable housing, but in many instances allows these projects and developments to be cornerstones for a larger remake or redevelopment of the communities that they exist in. And then finally, the availability of capital for affordable housing that, as I talked about earlier, the pool seems to be on one hand decreasing, but by the very same token, there are a lot of different sources that could be made available, or different approaches to expanding the sources of capital for affordable housing. Because we all know that development moves at the speed of money. And I think, first and foremost, from a public standpoint, being able to create more dedicated sources of capital to be able to be part of the financing and capital section of affordable housing at rates and terms that really make these deals work. And I think, again, things like opportunity zones could be tweaked, and some of the things that may be coming out of the federal government as it relates to trying to augment the delivery of affordable housing could be significant. There's been some talk about the Capital Magnet Fund and funds like that may have more robust resources than they've had in the past. And so, again, I just think that you've got to figure out how do we reduce the cost to the end user if we want to be able to continue to call what we produce affordable housing. So I'll stop right there and give it back to you, Don, and thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you, Oliver. And absolutely, public-private partnerships are definitely critical to moving this forward. We do have a couple questions in the chat. I have a couple questions myself. I'm going to go to the chat first, and I encourage if anyone has a question to go ahead and pop it in there now. Let's see, we have a question from James to David, and he says, how are your conversations with the government agencies going?
Swimmingly.
Do you care to expound on that?
It's all over the map. I think in general, our municipality partners are just as interested in being as effective in meeting the affordable housing needs for homeowners as all of us are. But the structuring within the parameters of, depending on what funds you're using, the structuring that they have to adapt is typically limited. But I really do see the local municipalities working to try to be a partner and and try and help come up with solutions that can make, you know, affordable housing effective.
If I could just add to that, I think we've seen more action at the county level to establish affordable housing trust funds with real money in them in the past few years than, you know, again, looking at our 20-year experience, I would say the past 5 years and then the 15 or 20 years before that, where counties are taking this seriously. You know, they are generating, because home values are going up, they are generating funds. I mean, so I think that the advent of sort of county level action on this and real money going into housing is a new and encouraging trend. Of course, they'll be able to leverage that a lot more if these state and federal resources come along too.
Thanks, Anne. I just want to give a reminder to everyone that we are going to have a short session evaluation that's launching now, and you can take the survey while we're answering the questions. So Anne, I have a question for you. As everyone knows, minimum wage is a hot issue right now. And here in Florida, the voters last year voted to raise the minimum wage. And I think in 5 years, we will be up to $15 an hour. But at the same time, the price of everything else is going up. Cereal is going up, gas is going up, and of course, housing is going up. So my question is, do you, in your expert opinion, do you think that the $15 an hour minimum wage is going to move the needle in terms of decreasing the percentage of folks who are cost burdened by housing? Or do you think that that $24 an hour housing wage is now going to become $28 an hour or $30 an hour? Are we really going to be making a dent with that?
Well, I think increasing the minimum that much, particularly because a lot of people who are working in lower wage jobs aren't necessarily working that steady 40 hours a week, you know, 52 weeks a year. So I think that pretty dramatic increase percentage wise in the minimum wage will make a difference. I mean, it's, you know, there's cost burden, there's cost burden, right? It's one thing to pay, you know, 35 or 40% of your income for your housing, but when it starts to get into 75, 80% of income, it's just impossible. So I would definitely say that every little bit helps, and bringing up that wage floor can help a lot. Again, especially if there are households who are combining wages. At the same, you know, and I think that we need to build that local affordable housing system that has a supply of supportive housing, affordable rental housing, and affordable home ownership opportunities, in part because they work with each other, right? And people become homeowners if they've had affordable rental housing, so they're able to save up for a home. So I think it's part of the solution. I don't think it should stall us in that effort to build an affordable housing supply.
David or Oliver, do you want to chime in at all?
Well, I do think that, again, in terms of just that whole wage thing, is important. In South Florida, for sure, we are in a low wage, high cost community. And it is really creating an issue, even from an affordable housing standpoint, from a multifamily standpoint, as the tax credit rents are rising. And generally the market relative to, you know, the folk who ultimately are the end users, they're still having challenges paying those higher tax credit rents just because the wages still don't catch up, particularly in terms of folk who are, you know, some of our essential service workers, in addition to just folk from a blue collar standpoint. So, you know, I just think that folk have to take a long, hard look at that, that if we want something different, that we're going to have to do something different.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Oliver. Another related question. I know we were talking about the rising costs for construction materials, land, et cetera. So realistically, if prices leveled off, at what point or how soon would that impact the housing market? How soon would that impact you all as you are seeking to build affordable projects? Would that happen in the next 6 to 9 months, or would it be 2 or 3 years down the road before you actually start to feel that impact?
Donna and David can speak for us. I think that's the real issue, is that nobody really knows, is that, you know, you have some folk who think that maybe one component in terms of discipline may see some stabling off, but nobody knows. I think that once the market does stable itself out, then you'll see, because everybody ends up being able to figure it out. And I think you'll see, again, just that whole delivery system kind of pick up and become as robust as it was in the past. The issue is right now is that once you think you figured this out, tomorrow it's different. And that's even, you know, it causes people just to take a step back. And so if you ask me, I hope it stops in the morning. You know, we can close a couple of deals in a few weeks. So
I think one advantage that single family has is that cycle is shorter than a lot of the larger, more complex financed rental projects. And so I think that allows us on the single family side to be more agile and adaptable to get back into the market and the pipeline just a little bit quicker. And so hopefully that will then be able to help to be, again, part of the beginnings of the stabilizing factor for our neighborhoods.
And if I could just add, I think just a real-time example. We bidded a couple of projects here recently. There was about a 45-day window between when we sort of identified, quote unquote, the winning bidder and their number. Within that 45-day window, we had a price increase of about 15%. And so, you know, when you're talking about a multi-million-dollar or, you know, $20 million contract, that's almost a $3 million increase in 45 days. So those are, again, are the implications of this whole market volatility. And in conjunction to people thinking that there's gold under their dirt, as David said.
All right, I'm checking the chat. I don't see any additional questions, and it looks like we are right about to the end of our hour. Terry, did you have anything that you wanted to add at this time?
I would just like to thank our amazing panel. I thought that was a really great discussion. And Anne, I need to sit down and talk with you. So, but I'd like to thank all of our speakers, our thought leaders, and thank Dawn for stepping up and moderating the session for us. I'd also like to remind everybody that we have one session left that starts at 4:30, and it is on using new markets tax credits for affordable home ownership opportunities. So a couple of big housing topics to close out our conference. And thank you for attending this session, and we hope to see you in about 30 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Terry.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
You too.